So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to officially welcome you to Problem Solving, a Six-Step Process. This webinar is a presentation of the New York State and CSEA Partnership for Education and Training. My name is Kyle Nurse, and I will be your host for today's webinar. And I'm joined by Ms. Sally Pardee, who will be your instructor for the day. Now, I'd like to take this moment to kind of just point out a few things. First, everyone has been muted. Again, that's just to keep the background noise at a minimum. Second, if you have any questions or comments, again, you can type them in the chat box. We've been using the chat box throughout the morning. That's where you've been telling me, where you're calling in from, what agency you represent, and a problem that you deal with at work. So again, just make sure that everyone is selected in the send area before hitting your response. That way we can all see your question, comment, or concern. Lastly, you will be performing some activities throughout today's webinar, which is going to involve you clicking on the raise hand button. And again, that's another way to get my attention. If you have a question and you have a microphone, you can go ahead and raise your hand. That's going to be found at the bottom of the panel next to the smiley face or your reactions emoji button. So if everybody can go ahead, do me a favor right now, and everybody just go ahead and raise your hand for me so that I know everybody in the room knows where that is. All right, I should see like 40 plus hands go up, so everybody raise your hand for me. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Now it's moving, now it's moving. Now, everybody go ahead and drop your hand by clicking on that same button. All right, looks like just about everybody has dropped their hand, and I appreciate you. So as I mentioned previously, today's webinar is sponsored by the New York State and CSEA Partnership for Education and Training, or as a lot of folks just like to refer to it simply as the partnership. Now, for those of you who may be wondering what exactly the partnership is, or you're not familiar with this, I want you to think of us as an organization that administers education and training programs for CSEA represented employees, and we do this through labor management cooperation. So in essence, we're funded through negotiated agreements between both New York State and CSEA. As an organization, we offer in-person classroom training, online learning, education advisement services, so when you think of the partnership, I want you to think of a joint labor management organization. And again, our sole mission really is to promote your career mobility, improve your job skills, support your workplace safety and health, as well as promote effective labor management relations. So if you want to learn more about who we are and what we do, you can give us a call directly, and I'll give you that contact information, and I'll give you our contact information again at the end of today's webinar, and it's also on the screen now. But now that you know a little bit more about the partnership, let's jump right into problem solving, a six-step process. And I'd like to turn things over to your instructor, Ms. Sally Pardee.
Good morning, everybody. So great to be here. I'm Sally Pardee. I'm with Echoes Instructional Design. We're a company that designs curriculum and does in-person and online training such as these. So so dealing with problems can be tiresome, right? Most of us would rather have everything working smoothly. But as you know, workplace problems are a reality. When you think about it, resolving problems can give us an opportunity to improve the work environment. If you have a tool to help you, problem solving doesn't have to be overwhelming. As state employees, you probably need to resolve workplace problems on a regular basis. And I see people in the comments saying exactly that. And that's why you're here, I can imagine. There are many different models or approaches to problem solving. This webinar will introduce to you a 6-step process that you can apply to most problems and is something you can use as an individual or with a team. As we go through today's webinar, we will work on describing the problem and identifying its root causes. Then we will apply strategies such as brainstorming to generate possible solutions. We will also discuss ways to select the best solutions to a problem. Finally, we will recognize ways to implement a plan and evaluate its effectiveness. As I mentioned earlier, there are many methods to resolve problems, just as there are many methods to playing chess. Today, we're going to focus on the 6-step problem-solving process, which you can find in the handouts for this webinar.
And if you haven't printed the handouts out for this webinar yet, again, you can always do so when the webinar concludes. You should have received those handouts probably about a week, maybe 2 weeks prior to this webinar, as an attachment to the confirmation email that you received.
The first step in the process is to describe or define the problem. Then we identify the root causes of the problem. At step 3, we generate ideas or brainstorm possible solutions to the problem. Next, we select the best option possible, considering all of the important factors. Step 5 is to implement the plan. And finally, step 6 is to evaluate the plan and make adjustments if we need to. As we go through the webinar, I'd like you to think about a workplace problem you have that could benefit from this process. So let's take a look at each step in more detail. In step 1, our goal is to understand the problem. This is important because if we don't know what the real problem is, how can we solve it? So what do you think are some key questions you should ask to make sure you have a solid understanding of a problem? Can you all type in your ideas about this in the chat box, if you would?
So go ahead and type your ideas about questions you could ask to help define a problem in the chat box. Again, your chat box is located at that bottom right-hand side of the screen. If it's not open, just go ahead and click on that word chat and it'll open up, and make sure everyone is selected in the send area before going ahead and hitting your response. So again, what are some of the questions that we could ask? And I have to scroll because they came in fast and furiously. Who's involved, I'm seeing. Planning. Karen, I haven't received the handouts. How do I get them? They would have been in your confirmation email. We can set you up with that a little bit later. So I'm seeing who's involved and planning so far. Go ahead. Let me hear from a couple other people. What are some questions that you could ask to help define a problem? Go ahead and put those in the chat. How has the problem impacted others? The who, what, where, when, why, and how. That's really what we're getting at, Grant. Thank you. We're really looking for the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Who or what is involved within the problem? Who is the problem with? Is this a recurring issue? So now we're cooking, Sally. You can see that there are a lot of different things that we would ask with regards to, trying to identify and define a problem.
Thanks. This is a great group. A lot of participation, and everybody's right on target. If I were to boil down all of your suggestions, I get a basic set of questions which are at the center of critical thinking. So, as many of you noted, Critical thinking questions include who, what, where, when, why, and how. You can apply these questions to any situation. For example, when you set out to describe the problem, you want to ask yourself who is involved. You also want to ask what the problem is, where, when, and why does it happen. It also helps to describe how you know it's a problem. So let's explore this further. Let's say you work in a unit of people who share two printers. About 3 times a week, you walk over to the larger printer to get your materials and find that the paper is out.
And I couldn't help but laugh because I might as well just go ahead and raise my hand.
Yeah, me too.
And I can see that there are quite a few hands that have gone up. So I am not
Yeah,
alone.
not alone. It's a typical problem, and it's a very frustrating problem that many of us employees face. But why does a problem like this really happen? And what would you really do when faced with the continuing problem of finding the papers out? Would you replace the paper while mumbling under your breath or something else? Can you type what you would actually do in the chat box if you would?
So go ahead and type your ideas about what you would really do or have done in this circumstance in the chat box. You come across the copier, there's no paper in it. What are you going to do? And I have to scroll. Having a tough time here to get to the bottom just to then go up to the top. I'm seeing people say I would replace it. It happens. I would refill it. I would just replace the paper,
Yeah.
fill it. So I'm seeing a lot of folks who just add paper and move on with their day, Sally.
Yeah, and I think they're nicer people than me. I think I'd have some not constructive thoughts about the people who didn't fill it. But uh, back to the topic at hand. Um, Maybe everyone's goal isn't to solve the printer problem. If it's your goal, though, the problem solving process will help you tackle it in a constructive way rather than reacting negatively. So let's apply our problem solving process to the printer issue. Consider the following information. Who is involved? In this case, all of the unit employees sharing the two printers. What is the problem? The printer runs out of paper several times a week, and you are having to replace it when you aren't expecting to. Where does it occur most often? The paper is running out more frequently on the large color printer. When does it occur? Well, it's affecting you about 3 times a week, but it's possible others are also having the same problem. How do I know this? My personal experience, but I've also heard other staff members complaining about it by the water cooler. Oversight or neglect, lack of understanding regarding staff roles, and so on. We will explore the why in more detail in a moment. Before we move on to the next step, does anyone have any questions about describing the problem?
So if you do have a question, go ahead and click on that raised hand button, or you can type it in the chat box. And looks like Karen has her hand up and Lori has her hand up. Let me see. Karen. Oh, looks like Karen and Lori took their hands down. Okay. And it doesn't look like we have anything in the chat, Sally, so it looks like you're good to move forward.
Okay. So now that we've described the problem, that is, we know what it really is, step 2 is to find the root causes. In other words, what is actually causing the problem to happen? Identifying root causes allows you to address them directly and truly solve the problem, rather than only addressing the symptoms like the empty paper tray. Please keep this in mind. It's possible that when you identify the root causes of a problem, you might need to rethink the original problem description. As you go along, you may discover other problems which may need to be handled using the same process. One way to identify the root causes of a problem is to ask why 5 times for each possible cause. This really forces you to go beyond the surface level to recognize factors contributing to the problem. I'll explain what I mean. Think about the printer problem we have been having. The larger printer may be one of the causes of our problem. So let's start by asking questions about the larger printer itself. Why is the paper running out more frequently in the large printer? Well, the large printer is used more often. Why? Because everyone's default printer is set to be the large printer. Why? Lack of awareness. It's just set automatically by ITS. Why? Lack of knowledge. Why? Guess no one has thought about it. Next, let's ask questions about the paper supply, which could be another cause of the problem. Why is the paper running out in the large printer? Because the printer has 3 paper trays and people don't check them regularly. Why? Because no one has been assigned to check the printer on a daily basis. Why? Because people assume someone else will go get the last room of paper did not refill the storage closet. Why? Because no one is tracking inventory. You can continue asking why 5 times for each possible cause of the problem, but I think you get the idea. Now that we have talked about how to identify root causes, what do you think is a root cause of the printer problem? Is it A, you have very bad luck? B, no one's tracking inventory? C, the large printer makes better copies? Or D, the storage closet is located too far away?
So I want you to notice that I've opened up the Slido panel on the right-hand side of the screen. I want you to take your mouse and click on the option A, B, C, or D that you feel is the best answer. When you're done, go ahead and click Send. And I'm also seeing it come up in the chat as well, B. Folks are saying that they can't see the Slido panel. I'm sorry if you can't see it. It should be on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm going to go ahead and close that because it looks like we have 100% of the folks who responded to the poll said B, and we also had some responses in the chat that were B and D. So looks like B was the overwhelming response, Sally.
Yes, the best answer here is B. No one is tracking inventory. By asking why, we were able to discover that a contributing factor to our printer problem is that no one is actually tracking the paper inventory in the closet nearby. Let's move on to step 3 of the problem-solving process, brainstorming. What exactly is brainstorming? Basically, it's an activity where people try to come up with as many ideas on a topic as possible. All ideas are accepted, no matter how crazy or irrelevant they seem, because they may spark other ideas. The benefits of brainstorming are that it generates a lot of ideas quickly. It encourages creativity and innovation. It involves all members of the group, and it creates a sense of ownership. A person can also do brainstorming on their own, but if you include more people, you'll get more ideas. Two heads are better than one. So I'd like to ask you another question. Have any of you used brainstorming at work before? And if
All right, so go ahead and throw in the chat if you've ever tried brainstorming before, and tell us if it was a positive experience or a negative one. And the responses are flying in. Grant says daily. Anne-Marie says positive. Amanda positive. Both positive and negative, I'm going to assume is what Sheila is saying. So it looks like the majority of the group every day, definitely a mixture of both helpful and tiring. I can understand that.
yeah,
Yes, and the results can go both ways. Brainstorming is one of my favorite creative processes. So as you can see, a lot of folks on the call have definitely utilized brainstorming.
that's great to hear, and it's so interesting to hear people's experience with it. If done right, brainstorming can be a great way to come up with ideas to solve problems. For brainstorming to work well, there are some guidelines that you should follow. First, it's best to set expectations in advance. You want to tell the team what the topic is and set a time limit that works for the size of your group. Explain how members can share their ideas, whether everyone can just shout out their idea or whether people should take turns. Next, you need to choose the right environment or setting for brainstorming. You want to make sure there's enough room for everyone so that they can see each other. There should also be a whiteboard or an easel pad for note taking. Remind the group that attitude is very important. Everyone should keep an open mind, and once again, all ideas should be accepted without judgment. Notes on all ideas should be captured as they're brought up. So choose a note taker. And make sure that you are recording all ideas equally and from a neutral standpoint. In other words, the note taker shouldn't add their own opinion to the idea. Writing down suggestions allows the other people to build on each other's ideas. At this point, we're looking for quantity of ideas, not quality. Finally, you provide a summary of the ideas that were shared. Then, do a quick recap at the end of the session and consider sharing notes by email afterwards. Sharing the notes after the meeting may spark even more ideas. So let's try a quick brainstorming session about our printer problem. What do you think are some possible solutions? And remember, we're looking for quantity, not quality at this point.
So go ahead and type in your brainstorming ideas for our printer situation in the chat box. Again, make sure that everyone is selected in the to area before hitting send. I see Grant chimed in SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, relative to scenario, time sensitive, effective. So that's actually smarter. Let's see, if I know I am printing a large amount, when I am done, replace it. Okay, so being proactive, keep paper by the printer, check daily, assign someone to track, replace after printing, have a team meeting just to go over housekeeping, check the printer daily to replenish what was used, send email requesting that everyone make sure that the printer is filled. They're coming in fast and furiously, and as you can see, we are definitely getting quantity with regards to our brainstorming session.
Absolutely. Yes. Assigning people, assigning staff, checking daily, moving the supply closer, and reminding people that it's a group effort. Yeah, these are great ideas. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions?
So if you do have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll give you the floor, or you can just drop it in the chat and we'll respond in kind. I see our brainstorming, we're still coming in.
Yeah.
But if you do have a question, let me see, are there any hands? Let me just check. I don't see any hands, and not seeing anything in the chat with regards to a question. I know that there was a question with regards to the Slido panel. Sally, if you don't mind real quick. I'm not sure why the Slido panel didn't open for everyone, but I will be opening another Slido panel, so hopefully it works. We'll kind of we'll see what happens and then try and troubleshoot it when we get there. But it looks like you're good to move forward, Sally.
Oh, great. So we have such an active group and we have so many possible solutions to our problem that we can consider. So once we brainstormed, step 4 is to select the best solution. And depending on the issue or the problem, might want to choose more than one solution to try. So let's explore the selection process. After your brainstorming session, you will hopefully have a nice list of suggestions, which we do. Whether it's long or short, you need to narrow your solutions down to the best options. Some methods for doing this include establishing criteria and considering pros and cons. If the brainstorming produced a lot of ideas, you might want to make the list more manageable through list reduction. Finally, we suggest coming to consensus to increase the chances that your solutions will work. In the next few slides, if you are working on a problem and have different possible solutions, what criteria or factors should you consider before you select the best solution? Can you think of any general ones, such as maybe how long it might take to put the solution into place? It might be helpful to think of a recent experience you've had with this.
So go ahead and type in some general things a person should think about before deciding on a solution in the chat box. Again, if your chat box is not open because the Slido panel is open, just go ahead and click on the word chat, that arrow next to it, and it'll open up. And I see Pamela chimed in. Practicality and ease of implementation are some things. Are there any unintended consequences? Weigh out the pros and cons, chimed in Jessica. I want to see a few others. What are some general things a person should think about? Pros and cons. Does it work? The volume of the project. What and who it may affect. Is it effective? So as you can see, we're looking at quite a few different things. Matthew chimed in, how long will it take to implement the solution? And then he also chimed in pros and cons and how many people are needed to implement the solution. Excellent. So as you can see, there are a lot of things that are going through with regards to, what we should be thinking about when it comes to a solution, Sally.
This is great. Thank you so much for these responses. And I'll just boil them down. It is basically what everybody had said. So the criteria you can use in most situations include what is the cost, what is the time, the effort, and what are your resources. Thinking about cost, time, effort, and resources is very important. After all, you want your solution to be practical and effective. You also want to make sure a solution is addressing the root causes and not the symptoms, such as being out of paper. Another factor to consider is whether or not the proposed solution is really doable. If no one in your unit can do a particular task, it won't be a good solution, as many of you have noted. The next method I'd like to talk about is making a pros and cons list. Actually, this can be combined with the method we just covered, setting criteria. When we compare a solution against the criteria we set up, it helps us to weigh the pros and cons of each idea. For example, if one of our criteria was how long a solution would take to put into place, an idea that has a quick turnaround time might get a note in the pros column. When you do things this way, it helps you identify the advantages and disadvantages of an idea based on facts instead of opinions. Another way to add notes to your pros and cons list is to ask yourself, as many people have asked, what could possibly go right or wrong if we do this? And if you remember, one of the other things we were talking about that we could do is to use a list reduction process. Can you raise your hand if you know what a list reduction process is?
I want you to go ahead and I want you to click the raised hand button if you know of or have heard of the list reduction process. We have some hands coming up. Excellent. Looks like about 5 or 6 folks are familiar with the list reduction process, Sally.
Okay, I'll describe it a little. A list reduction can help you narrow down the possible solutions to a problem. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that a group of employees came up with several different ideas to fix a problem. Just to save time, we're going to name their ideas the outrageous idea, the sensible idea, the practical idea, the low cost idea, the really idea, the great idea, the stinker idea, and the groovy idea. Now, normally you'd see a short phrase for each of your solutions, other than that, what I've said. And the phrase would be something like buy a new printer. Next, then you give each person 3 dots and have them place their dots next to the solutions that they like the best. By doing this, you'll start to see that some ideas don't have as much interest. This will allow you to put your energy into those ideas that have the most support. In this example, 5 of the proposed solutions have 2 or less dots, and that would be the really idea, the groovy idea, and the outrageous idea, which I guess makes sense. You could ignore those for now and then focus on the 3 solutions that have more support, which are the practical support, the great idea, and the low cost idea. So, what do you do if people can't agree on one or more solutions? Should the group vote and the majority choose the way forward? Should the team leader decide? Or is there another way? The last method we'll discuss today is reaching consensus. After looking at things like criteria, pros and cons, and a reduced list if needed, the group can decide on the best options by building consensus. Consensus means that the group keeps working until they reach general agreement on a solution in the interest of moving forward. In other words, everyone agrees that the proposed solution is acceptable enough that they can live with it. It may not be the perfect solution, but everyone will support it and will be willing to help make it work. Consensus building can help when the issues are challenging or complex. I just want to take a moment to mention that consensus and compromise are not the same thing. When people compromise, no one is getting everything they really want. They are conceding or giving in, and because of that, some people may resist the final decision. Rather, consensus means that the group members have come to an agreement on how to move forward in the best way possible. When this happens, there will be more buy in from the group, and that will increase the chances that the solution will be successful. That doesn't mean that there's no place for compromise. However, consensus, by its nature, tends to create a better quality outcome. Now that we have covered several ways to select the best solutions, let's see if you understand the concept. I have a feeling this group will. What is the main idea behind selecting the best solutions? Is it A, list reduction increases the number of possible solutions? B, it is helpful to establish criteria and consider the pros and cons? Or C, consensus reduces buy-in from the group?
Okay, so I'd like for you to notice that I've opened up the Slido panel on the right-hand side of the screen. The question is, what is the main idea behind selecting the best solution? And I want you to take your mouse and click on the option A, B, C that you feel is the best answer. I see, Suzanne, you're saying you don't see a Slido poll. I see quite a few of you are responding in the chat, and that is okay. And still no Slido. I am not understanding why you are not seeing the Slido poll. I see those of you who do see the Slido poll, 100% of you have chimed in that B is the correct answer. And then when I go to the chat, it looks like the overwhelming majority of you who don't see the Slido poll but are voting via chat are also saying B as well.
Great. Yeah, you're all correct. The best answer is B. It is helpful to establish criteria and consider pros and cons when selecting the best options. We also learned that the list reduction process can help by narrowing down the proposed solutions rather than increasing the proposed solutions to those that may be more successful. And consensus actually helps increase the buy-in from the group members rather than decrease because they agree on the best way to move forward. And now we're at implementation. So far, we have covered steps 1 through 4. We've describing the problem, identifying the root causes, brainstorming possible solutions, and selecting the best options. Now we're ready for step 5, implementing or putting the plan into effect. Before we move on to this topic, does anyone have any questions about anything we've covered so far?
So if you do have a question, go ahead and click that raise hand button, or you can or you can drop it in the chat and we'll respond in kind. Not seeing any hands at the moment. And outside of the Slido poll, I'm not seeing anything. Hold on, Grant chimes in, path of least resistance isn't a bad thing. Grant, do you have a microphone? No. I hate to ask you to type like that, but if you could just give me a little bit more. Path of least resistance isn't necessarily a bad thing. What I'm reading is that the easy way sometimes might not be the bad way. Path of least resistance indicates that it is being used. Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you for that. Now it makes sense to me. All right. Excellent.
Modern education workforce development. This is Sheila speaking.
Hi, Sheila.
Sheila.
Oh, Sheila's not muted.
She's in a meeting right now. Can I ever call you? Yeah, I'll give her.
There we go. All right. Sorry about that. Sally, as you can see, there are no questions. Grant did have a comment, but it looks like you're good to move forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. So at this stage, you've already identified a couple of solutions for the problem. Now you want to focus on creating an action plan to make it happen. This step involves identifying who will be responsible for each task, establishing deadlines, determining if additional resources are needed, and keeping track of completed items. A few moments ago, we spoke about the root causes of the printer problem. Can anyone think of a goal or task that we might want to put in place to fix the problem? If so, type your ideas in chat.
So go ahead and type any ideas about the tasks that we could do in the chat box with regards to our printer problem. Move paper closer to the printer. Assign the task to a responsible staff person. That's a little slippery though, because responsible person, irresponsible person, you know what they say, like when you're really good at your job, it just gets you more. That could cause some resentment. Place the paper in an area closer to the printer again. So again, maybe relocating the paper. Weekly or monthly task list. I like that. All right, excellent. So as you can see, Sally, there are quite a few. Send an email out to the office members requesting their level of interest in becoming the individual who checks the paper supplies. I like that, their level of interest. Good luck with that one. Place a note near the paper that has been approved by chain of command. Relocate the paper. So as you can see, there are quite a few different thoughts with regards to our situation, Sally.
That is great. And it looks like we came up with several solutions to the printer problem. And the ones reflected on this slide are the ones that all of you guys were proposing as well. So let's say that after evaluating the criteria, going through a list reduction process, and reaching consensus, we've decided to put 4 actions into place. The first could be to assign support staff to check the printers on a daily basis. In this case, the support team supervisor is responsible for doing this task. As you can see, the due date is May 29th. The additional resource is a schedule that shows 5 staff members who will be rotating this task on a monthly basis, which is a concern many of you raised. The second solution is to assign someone to check the paper supply closet. We decide that the support team supervisor will also be responsible for this task every Monday. The due date for this action is May 29th. The third solution is to move the paper supply closer to the printer area. The office manager is designated as the person responsible for completing this task. He will also get a larger cabinet so that more paper can be available near the printers. And that'll make it easier for the staff to refill the paper trays. Due date on that is May 22nd. The last solution is to change the staff members' printer defaults. The unit manager is charged with figuring out if some staff members could set their printer defaults to the smaller printer based on their job responsibilities. She will also develop a job aid to coach the unit's employees on how to change the defaults. That's always tricky. The due date is June 5th. As each task is completed, you should record the actual date it was done. It's always great if some tasks are finished before the deadline. Sometimes it could take a bit longer. However, try to keep on track as long as possible. Now, the implementation plan we just discussed seems reasonable, but it would be a mistake to end there. Let's think about any plan in general for a moment. How do you know if a plan is working? How can you tell? I'd like you to type your ideas about this in the chat box if you could.
So go ahead and share your ideas about how you would know if a plan was working in the chat box. Heather says if you don't run out of paper, anyone else is trying to print, the paper's always filled. Create a quick follow-up survey, no more complaints. Have a follow-up meeting to check if the plan is working. If you stop having the problem, then the plan is supposedly fixed or supposed to fix. If it isn't a topic of conversation, yeah, the needs are being met. So I'm seeing that, just to kind of sum them up, that we definitely want to, do some follow-up, and if the problem is no longer an issue, then it's been solved, Sally.
Great, thanks so much. So as we all are discussing, one way to see if a plan worked is to have a follow-up meeting to discuss it. As other people have said, you could send a survey, you can conduct an inspection, you could use a checklist, or you can look at data to find out if the problem is happening less than it was before. But to really stay on track, you should make a plan for evaluation. Step 6 of the problem-solving process is just that: evaluate the plan. The purpose of evaluation is to determine if the solutions you put into place actually help solve the problem. You may find that everything worked as planned. You might also realize that some solutions worked and others did not. And along the way, you might find other opportunities for improvement. So, let's explore this more in detail. Another concern involved the supervisor forgetting to check the supply cabinet on Mondays. This was especially challenging on weeks with Monday holidays. In this case, setting up a task reminder in Outlook could help the supervisor remember to check the supply cabinet. So, at the same time you implement the plan, decide on a date to evaluate it and how you'll do it, such as a meeting or a survey. There's no magic follow-up time frame. You want to make sure there's enough time for the solutions to make a difference, but don't wait too long. This will allow you to make sure that actions have been carried out in a timely manner and will also let you make adjustments so that you can have success. So now, let's see.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sally. Looks like Grant had a question
Oh, okay.
or a comment in the chat. He says, I don't know if it makes sense. If it is rehashed again and again, is it a solution? I wouldn't necessarily call it a solution, but I think that if it's being rehashed again and again, that it's gone from a problem to problematic. And at that point, once something has become problematic, I think that we need to reevaluate any solutions that we've come up with to that point. Does that make sense, Grant?
Yeah, and exactly, Kyle. I think we talked about that earlier too, that sometimes when you're getting into your solution and you're evaluating whether it worked, you realize there were other problems, and you need to rethink your definition of your problem.
Are there any other questions? That was a good one. Thank you, Grant, for your comments. Not seeing anything in the chat, so it looks like you're good to move forward.
Great. Now it's time for a short recap. We reviewed the six-step problem-solving process. We were able to describe a problem and identify its root causes. Then we applied strategies like brainstorming, list reduction, and consensus to create solutions and select the best options. Finally, we covered how to implement and evaluate a plan. Your work is not done though. At the beginning of the webinar, I asked you to think about a workplace problem you deal with. Now, I'd like you to consider how you can apply the six-step problem-solving process to that problem. These steps work in all types of workplace situations. Whether you provide administrative support, work in an institutional setting, or perform operations and maintenance work. It takes a bit of practice, but we've given you the six-step problem-solving process and worksheet in your handouts to help you remember how to do it. And I think it's an excellent summary of what we did today. It really is a helpful guide that you could just put on your phone, carry with you. It's very useful. We also offer a full-day course you might like called Effective Problem Solving through the Partnership's Skills for Success program. If you are interested in learning more about this topic, take a look at the Skills for Success catalog on the Partnership website for this and other courses. So that about wraps things up for today. I'd like to thank you all for your time. This has been a tremendous group, and I'm going to pass the presentation back to your host, Kyle.
Okay, thank you, Sally, for that excellent presentation. It was a great webinar. Before I wrap up, I just want to mention that When you close our webinar, a brief online survey is going to pop up in a new window. That's our evaluation, all right? Please take the time to, provide us with your feedback. Again, that's your opportunity to let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, what we could be doing better, because ultimately we want to make sure that we are tailoring our products to really meet your needs. I'd also like to mention, if you scan the QR code on the screen, it's going to take you to our Skills for Success catalog. That's where you can look for upcoming classes, webinars, whether they be in person or online learning. So again, you can just simply scan that QR code with the camera app on your phone. We do have a little bit of time left for questions and answers. So I'll open that up in a second. But prior to doing that, I just want to say, if you haven't heard it today, I appreciate you. Everybody who is in this call or on this call truly represents the ground, the boots that hit the ground when it comes to the work that the state of New York needs to get done. So with that being said, on behalf of Sally, on behalf of the partnership, and on behalf of the state of New York, I just want to say thank you for what it is that you do and how you go about it. I appreciate your energy and your effort today with our webinar. If you do have to log off and you don't have any questions, you're more than free to log off. Again, just don't forget to hit up that evaluation. If you do have questions, I'm going to open up the floor. We've got about 9 minutes left of airtime, so I can open up the floor to any questions that you may have.